Welcome back, everyone. Dan Vega here, and today we're going to be talking about query by example. This allows you to create some really dynamic queries without writing custom queries, without writing custom JPA, without writing all of these custom dynamic finders. We're going to use something called query by example, and we'll write a new app. I'll show you some of the reasons, something you might have come across before, like when you want to do some kind of filtering or searching based on a number of optional fields. Query by example is really perfect for that. I'm doing this because I got a question about query by example in a GraphQL repository. And so I figured before we jumped into that example, it'd be nice to start here and just talk about what query by example is, how it works, how we can start using it in our Spring applications today. So what I'm going to do is head over to this repository. I'll go ahead and leave a link to this in the description below. But this is just an example project that I put together on how to use query by example. Now, it goes in and it talks about some recs, some getting started stuff. But what I want to kind of focus on here is when to use query by example, because I think this is important. So search forms with multiple optional fields. This is really kind of my first go-to. Like if I have a bunch of fields and I may want to filter on field 1 and field 3 in one search, and then maybe field 1, 2, and 3 in another search, I don't want to have to write all these different queries, and I don't want to have to write these different dynamic finders for all of the different use cases, right? So we can use query by example in that case. Really quick prototyping and development, especially in GraphQL, where you don't even need to write a controller. You can just say, hey, here's my GraphQL repository, and it used query by example behind the scenes. Simple equality-based queries, scenarios where search criteria are unknown at compile time, and that's good. Where you don't want to use this, if you have these large complex queries and you want to do greater than or less than or in between, or conditions, complex joins, custom SQL functions you're calling, maybe not a good example of that. But I love this for searching and for really just kind of rapid prototyping, getting something up and running. So we'll see an example of that. There's a bunch in this final repository that I probably won't show off today, like the tests. But yeah, there's a lot going on here. I also link to the documentation for query by example. If you want to dive in and learn a little bit more, this is a really good place to do so. But with that, head over to start.spring.io, create a new project. We're going to use Java, Maven. Group is dev.danvega. We'll call the artifact query by example. I'll put this in a package called dev.danvega.qbe. I'm using JDK 23. What we will need for this project: I need Spring Web. I need Spring Data JPA. It works with JPA. I need validation. I'm going to do some validation on some input coming into the controller, if we even get to some of that today, but that's in the final repository. Spring Boot DevTools, and then I'm going to store some data in the database, some employee data, so that we can see some different examples of this. And so I'll use Postgres as the database, and because I don't want to have to configure a Postgres database on my local machine or have to ask you to do that, I'm going to include the Docker Compose support. So you will need Docker Desktop to run this when you pull it down. If you don't have that, that's okay. Pull the Postgres stuff out. Use something like H2. You may need to modify the SQL script that loads the data into the database, but I don't think that should be too hard, especially with AI these days, right? If you're not sure how to do that, that's okay. I remember being there. I'm still there on certain things. Just take that SQL script, ask AI to convert that to an H2 SQL script, right? So I think that's all we'll need to get started. With that, you want to go ahead and click Generate. This will download a zip. You can open up in whatever your favorite IDE or text editor is. Most importantly, what you're most productive in. Whatever you're productive in as far as a IDE or text editor goes, that's the best one, not the one that I'm most productive in. It's one you're productive in, right? So open it up there. I'm going to open up in IntelliJ Ultimate Edition. And what are we waiting for? Let's write some code. All right, so here we are in the project. The first thing I'm going to do is open up our compose.yaml. This is the configuration to load a Postgres database instance or a container here. And I'm just going to update a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is say that our database is employees. We'll say this is password. And then finally, user. And I also want to go ahead and make the port 5432 available on my local machine so I can connect through my database tools and actually see the database. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to application.yaml. And I'm going to open this up, and we are going to change this to, let's grab this. Query by example is the name. So we'll say Spring, application, name, and this is query by example. And then I'm going to pull in a little bit more configuration here. So all we're saying here is, hey, when we have a SQL file, we want you to always run that. So you have to change this if this is not an embedded database, and this is not. So we need to say this so it'll pick up our SQL file when we write that. And then for JPA, we're just saying, hey, show the SQL. We want to format SQL. We want to create and drop, because again, this is a demo. We're just kind of dropping the database and creating it every time we run. And then we have some logging levels here. So the next thing we'll want to do is add some data. So I asked my AI friends to go ahead and create a script that will load a bunch of data for us. So I'm going to say data.sql. I'm going to paste this in here. And again, we're just inserting into employees, first name, last name, department, position, and salary, and then a whole bunch of values. This will give us some dummy data so that we can go ahead and test some things out. Okay, so with that, I think the first thing that we're going to need is a class to represent our employee. So let's go ahead and create a new package in here, or a new Java class. We'll call this inside of the employee package. We'll say this is called employee, and this is going to be a class. Now again, I'm going to copy some info here so we don't have to watch me type this out. But we are essentially going to create a class that lines up with that table that I saw before. So this is going to be our entity. We are given the table name of employees. We have, why is this? Let's just do this. So why is that coming in twice? Did we grab the wrong one? Let's do this. Let's do this at ID. All right, now we have our ID. So we have ID, first name, last name, department, position, and salary. I have a no-args constructor, which is required for JPA. I have a bunch of getters and setters here. I also put in a builder. So this builder just helps us create an instance of a class. So this is a static class inside of here called builder. It just helps us build out an employee. And then we have a toString. So we're starting to get there. The next thing that I'll need is a repository. So let's go ahead and call this the employee repository. And this is going to be an interface. And what we're going to do with this is extend a couple of the Spring Data repositories. So we're going to say extends JPA repository. Again, the ID type, or the type that we're working with, is an employee. The ID in this case is a long. And we're also going to extend the query by example executor, and this works off the employee object. So that is enough to get us going there. If we look in JPA repository, and we look down at the bottom, we have a find all that takes in an example. One takes an example, one takes an example, and a sort. And again, the example is support for query by example. An example takes a probe to define the example. Matching options and type safety can be tuned using an example matcher. So this is where the query by example support comes in. But also we brought in this one because this one has a little bit more. We can do things like find one, find all. We can count. We can see if something exists, and then we can find by, and this takes an example and a function called query function. So there's a little bit more inside of the query by example executor, so we brought both of those in. Okay, so we're starting to get there, but before we do anything, let's see if we can run our application. What we want to see is this data.sql get picked up and a database created for us, and we can connect to that database and make sure all of that data is in there. So let's start there and see if that works. Okay, and we come down here and we see a table was created. So table was created. I don't see anything about our data getting in there, so let's double check something here. Data.SQL, and our init mode is always. Am I showing SQL? I am. So let's just check our database. I don't think anything's in there, but I have been wrong before. So if you remember, this is user, password, and the database is called employees. And so let's go ahead and apply that, click OK. And if we look at the table for employees, there is our data. I wonder why I wasn't logged out, but that's okay. So we have our data in here. So we have a bunch of data. This is good. This is stuff that we can work with now. So now we need to start to build out some queries that talks to that database. Now, again, in the past, we can open up our repository. We can use everything that is in here. Like if we just wanted to find all, we could. But what I want to talk about is, hey, what if we come in and we want to do some like searching or filtering? Normally what I would do is I would come in here and create all these different finders. So I might come in here and say, give me a list of employees. And what I want to do is find all by first name. So then I might take in a first name, right? Then what I might do is go, oh, I realize that I need another way to find all by first name and last name, right? So string first, string last. And I'm not going to go through this, but you could see that, you know, depending on the number of fields that you have, you might end up creating all these different dynamic finders to account for all of the situations that you might use when it comes to searching. And this can get a little bit tedious. And this is where one of the things that Query by Example really helps us solve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new service class. So let's say Java class employee service. And this is going to be a service class. And we're going to get that repository. So let's say private final employee repository. We will get this through constructor injection. And now we can start to use that repository. All of the methods in the JPA repository, all the methods in the Query by Example executor repository, we have access to those. So I'm going to write one out, and then we'll paste the rest in and kind of talk through them. But the first one I might want to do is find all employees matching exact criteria, right? So let's say list of employees is what I'm going to return. And we'll call this find employees by example. And what we will take in as an argument is an employee. We'll call this employee. And then what we can do is we can say example.of, and that takes in a probe. And that probe in this case is just going to be the employee that we pass in. So what we'll get back is an example for that. So let's say example. And now what we can do is we can ask the repository. So we can say repository dot find one. Oh, are we find? No, I'm sorry, find all. And you could see one of these takes in an example. So we can pass that example in, right? And I just realized something. If I'm going to paste some code in here, let's go ahead and refactor this. I'm going to rename this to employee repository, just to be safe. So that, right? Employee repository. There we go. So now what we can do is we can use that to pass in an employee and basically say, hey, go ahead and find me any employees that look like that one. And that allows us to do a couple of things. Like we can just pass in, say, a first name and say, find me an employee with a first name. We could say, find me anybody with an employee of the first name of this and a department of this. So we get to get a little bit creative there. So let's test this out. I'm going to do that by creating a new Java class. We're going to call this employee controller. And this will be a REST controller. And we will go ahead and set a request mapping of /API/employees. And what we'll do is we'll get our service. So we'll say private final employee service, and we'll call this employee service. We'll get that through constructor injection. And then I'm just going to get a get mapping here. So let's say get mapping of /search/example. And then what I'll do is in there, I will say we are going to return a list of employees. And we will call this find by example. And then what we'll do is we'll take in a request body. So a request body. And we'll also make sure that it's valid, although we don't have any validation rules on it yet. And we'll say employee. And I just realized that this will be a post mapping. And now what we can do is we can use that service and we can say, hey, employee service, return to me find by employees by example, and we'll pass in that employee. So now what we do is when we call search example on a post mapping, we are going to send in an employee that kind of looks like that. And that will return to us any employees that look like that. All right, so I'm going to use my generate request in HTTP client that's built into IntelliJ, but you could use any other tool like Postman or HTTP and I'm going to go ahead and generate a post to localhost 8080 API employees search example. And then we're going to pass in an employee. So let's go back to our data. And I just want to see if I can find Jane Doe. Actually, we'll just look for Jane in department IT. So let's say Jane, and the department is IT. So I'm not going, actually, I think I can just go ahead and pass everything in. And there is our particular user. So let's see if we can rerun our application. And then I'm going to run a post request to that with this information. And we'll see if we can find Jane. Okay, so it's actually looking for a big decimal. Let's see if we can just provide just the information that we care about. And run this again. And now we see that we do indeed find Jane in IT. So this is good, but again, this is being able to be flexible here. Like I want to pass in certain search options. So maybe I want to find everybody that is in the department of IT. Let's go ahead and run that again. And now we see we get a list of people that are in, or employees that are in the department of IT. So that's working well. So I'm going to go back to my employee service here. We're going to paste in a few more examples. So let's say these per, yep, that'll work. Then we can do things like this. So now this was like the basic example. What if we wanted to find one? We could do that. So this will only return one or an optional. We can also do some custom matching rules. So the first two we're kind of just using an example. Now what we can do is say, okay, I'm going to take in a first name in a department, but if you remember back from that post request that I made, Jane matched exactly, and so did department. So now what we're doing is we're setting up an employee using that builder, and we're using this example matcher. So this example matcher allows us to say with ignore case, so we can ignore case for all string matches. Then we're using a string matcher. So we want to do something like containing, which is like a like in a SQL query. So we're saying, hey, find me something that's like this. Ignore null values. The first name needs to match exactly. The department needs to contain it. So if we were to do something like that, we can easily find somebody like first name starts with J or Jane or John. I think there's a couple Johns in our sample data, but I don't need to match the department exactly. I just need to kind of match it. So let's see if we can't figure out a way to do that. So I am going to copy this in. Let's go back to our controller and let's use this thing called search. And now what I'm doing is taking in a first name and a department, and I'm finding employees with a custom matcher. So if we go back to our data, let's see if we can't find somebody like John. I think John and Johnny is in there. That's probably not going to work. Jane, I thought I had somebody with the same first name, but I guess I do not. So in this case, I can search for John, but just I, because that will find that department. So if I had another John, let's just do this. Let's do this. Let's put another John in the manager department. So let's say John Fu, department is going to be sales, position is manager, and we'll just leave their salary the same. So let's go ahead and rerun this application. So let's come back here, run this. And now what I want to do is do a GET request to /search with a first name and a department. So let's go ahead and use that to generate that. And we can see that the first name is, let's say, John. And then the, oh, you know, I probably should have put a, this is a different department without an I in it. So let's say marketing, because that will pick up an I. So let's do that again. And then in our generated requests, we're just going to say I. So let's see if that works. Let's go ahead and run a request to that. And we did not find first name. Oh, that's why. So let's try that again. There we go. So now we were able to pick up John from the IT department and John from marketing because we did a containing match on it. So again, I hope what's coming across here is that we can start to build out some really great ways to do searches and then filtering without having to write all of these kind of custom finders. So I'll put a little bit more in the repository as well as a bunch of tests so you can see a bunch of different examples. But I think these kind of these basic ones show that off. And this shows off using some of those custom matching rules. So I thought it was fun. A little bit of an introduction to query by example. If you're using Spring Data JPA and you're using repositories already, go ahead and extend that query by example executor and you get some more options out of there. I have examples for being able to test like counts and exists and a whole bunch of other things. Again, it's not for every situation. We kind of pointed that out at the beginning of the video, but for certain situations, it works out really well. And I'm going to be continuing on with the query by example. In the next video, when we talk about GraphQL, you can go ahead and put an annotation on our repository at GraphQL repository, and then you don't even need to like write out the controller methods, which is really, really cool. So, hey, I hope you learned something new today. If you did, do me a favor, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding, friends.